if you're new to these meetings, this is for the West Falls Church Active Transportation Study Advisory Group. My name is Tim Kutz. I'm with the Fairfax County Department of Transportation, and we're meeting today for the 6th time. And the goal of today, I'll get into the agenda in a second, is really to try to finalize the priorities that you all have looked at over the past several months. See if there's anything that we might need to clarify in the recommendations before we present those to the community. And I just want to, really talk about some of the ways in which you all have viewed these recommendations, why you think they should be prioritized over others, for example. And so that'll be really the crux of our discussion this evening. So we can go to the next slide. So again, pretty short agenda. I will be giving some updates as far as the rezoning process. There are some moving pieces there that I'll speak to. And then some other updates generally within the study area about some active transportation improvements that are in the works or soon to be completed even. And then we'll talk about the priority project review, as I mentioned, and really get your input on what you think the priority project should be going forward to the community, and talk about next steps, what that community meeting, those 2 sets of community meetings will look like, followed by a public comment as we have at the end of every meeting. So some updates on the Wilmada rezoning case. So a traffic impact analysis was submitted to FCDOT earlier in the spring, and we are now, along with VDOT, reviewing their second submission. So the first submission was submitted. The FCDOT reviewer had several comments, and as well as the VDOT reviewers. They submitted those comments to the traffic consultant, the applicant, and they have since made revisions and attempts to respond to those comments. And so now FCDOT and VDOT have about a month to look at those comments, to look at the refreshed TIA, see if all their issues were addressed, and provide further comments if needed, and a resubmission if warranted. So to talk about not only the TIA, but what's going on with the rezoning site, as you can see pictured here on the left. This is the Wilmada parcels. There will be a community meeting that Drainsville is working with the McLean Citizens Association, MCA, to organize, and that'll be scheduled for sometime in late October. So if you want some background before that, we do have now a lot of the information posted on Plus. So I'll send these slides out after the meeting so you can have access to these links. But Plus is basically the system that allows the planners or reviewers to upload documents such as the TIA, such as the the design plans, development plans, and anything else that the applicant submits to the county. So that's something new, at least on the TIA side, that the site analysis team and FCDOT is now uploading those documents to applications such as this. So that's a really helpful tool to use, and I'm happy if anybody wants to meet outside of this to talk about how to use that and access some of these. I'm happy to walk through that with any of you all. Some other updates, if we can go to the next slide. A lot of great things going on. We've continued to coordinate with VDOT and City of Falls Church on their the city's project, that is the West Falls project. So we do have some good news in that regard, that VDOT and the city have talked to us about the intersection design at Haycock, Route 7, and Shreve Road. That's been really a major priority of this group, as well as many others who are involved in the project and are aware of it, is trying to increase comfort at that intersection, increase safety at the intersection for pedestrians and cyclists. So they will, or they have changed the design of that intersection to include a curb extension on the northern corner there. So where they have their anchor tenant, the grocery store, planned. So that's a great improvement. Again, there's still more that could be done at this intersection, as we've noted. Changes to pedestrian signal timings, and pedestrian refuge median possibly in the future if study warrants that. So I think it's still good to keep that as an AG priority as you guys have done, but just wanted to mention that kind of development that's been more recent. Another one that you can see pictured on the bottom left. This is as we've talked about before, the Red Road crossing along Idlewood Road. Couple issues here. Obviously, you can see there's no crosswalk that's not marked. And then you all have noted that there's a visibility issue. So when you're turning out of Red Road, it's difficult to see drivers because of the grade there. And for pedestrians, especially if there are vehicles turning there, they don't, it's hard for them to be seen, especially with faster moving traffic. So one really actually well-timed initiative that the Board of Supervisors just endorsed today or authorized today. FCDOT staff has requested to apply for a grant that you may have heard of, the federal grant for Safe Streets and Roads for All. It's a really big initiative, federal initiative, $6 billion grant program, $1 billion of that allocated for fiscal year 2022. And so FCDOT has identified several projects, primarily around schools, and primarily projects that are, quick fixes to try to advance and use that funding to advance active transportation in those areas. So Red Road happens to be this crossing, along with the regrading of that embankment happens to be one of those projects. There's 18, I should say, Safe Routes to School projects that they're looking to use this money to sort of address. Again, this is a grant that they're applying for, that FCDOT is applying for. But if awarded, they'd be looking to solve 18 potential Safe Routes to School issues around the county. 16 of those have been identified. 12 of those have been identified. And then they would be doing a survey amongst all the other schools in the county to try to identify other potential projects, so 6 other potential projects. So really great initiative, and something that I think going forward is going to be, it's a 6-year program, will be great for the county to kind of continue looking for ways to use more of those federal dollars to address active transportation projects. Another recent update, we have a area right outside the 1-mile boundary of our study area at Westmoreland, and you can see that pictured on the bottom right. This is crossing Westmoreland Street at Hopewood Drive. So I went out and took that picture just last week, and that project should be wrapped up. If any of you are familiar with the area, should be wrapped up by the end of this month. So that'll be a new pedestrian refuge island, and crossing for folks trying to get across Westmoreland, which is really a great and relatively inexpensive improvement along that corridor. Another recent update, we have partnered with the City of Falls Church on their Shreve Road Trail project. So that's kind of shown at the top there. I've talked about this before, creating a 10-foot shared use path and a buffer along Shreve Road from the W&OD Trail up to the intersection of Haycock Road and Route 7. And that's something that the city has asked the county to sort of help administer. We're getting together the scope of work for the design of that project, and should have some more updates hopefully shortly for you all on that. Mike and I also met with VDOT recently to talk about a potential slow streets pilot program. Again, slow streets, if you recall, was kind of that initiative that really began as part of the pandemic, but even kind of going before that is sort of this concept of having a shared street, using a local, maybe less traveled street, and kind of blocking it off to exclusive pedestrian and bicycle use, aside from, of course, the people that live there and need to access it, local access that is. But we're trying to look at ways that we can pilot that concept around Fairfax County, and actually Jeremy, I'm glad you're on tonight because I know we've talked about doing this potentially at Gordon's and Chestnut Street. I think those two streets would be good candidates. So would definitely like to raise that when we get to that quadrant as a potential candidate for this project. But just those are some of the recent updates we have. I think there's a lot obviously that still needs to be done, and that's why we're meeting here today to try to go over what we can prioritize going forward. But some progress at least in this area, which is a bit of good news. So we can go to the next slide. So I only have a few slides tonight, and we're going to start off with looking at the quadrants. Oh, Cheryl, go ahead.
Thank you, Tim. But before we get into the quadrants, several people in my community have asked, how are we supposed to prioritize our work across quadrants? Is every quadrant going to be given the same weight? That's to say, if there are projects along Haycock and Great Falls that we think are really higher priority, and in keeping with the scope of work of this advisory group, are they given more credence than maybe a lesser priority project, but that's still rated high in a separate quadrant? So the question really is are we beholden to this quadrant system? Is every project given the same weight because it's high ranked in a quadrant, or are we going to try and prioritize them and take them out of the quadrants?
So we could do the latter. My thought in doing the former was that we have these sort of main avenues that are kind of connecting into the metro station. So a lot of the ones in this quadrant, for example, are focused along Shreve Road and along Leesburg Pike. Then the next quadrant, Idlewood Road, is really the main focus. Quadrant after that, Great Falls Street, I think even parts of Westmoreland Street, and then Haycock Road is really the main focus of the southeast quadrant. So I think kind of treating those all equally as sort of avenues into the metro station was the approach I thought would be the fairest. But if the advisory group has thoughts on that, and if you all think that there should be a different way that we go about that, I'm happy to hear your thoughts. Bruce, go ahead. Oh, you're muted, Bruce.
Speaking for myself, I'm satisfied with this way of proceeding. I find it intelligible.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that? It's a good point. Sonia, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess just given that, some of the projects are different, I mean, there's some that are clear priorities and we feel like, we want to prioritize and do, but the costs of some of them are different. And I don't know how ultimately that will compare quadrant to quadrant and how things will flesh out. I have no problems with the quadrant. I think looking at these, these four main roads, or that I think that was four, but those main roads that you mentioned that are essentially circling the metro station area are the right places to look. I guess what I just don't really understand is, like, within those quadrants, what's going to make sense, and if one project in one quadrant might make more sense than another project in a different quadrant when we really start getting down to figuring that out. Is it going to be an equal number in certain quadrants, or how many? Are we just going to prioritize all of these in a certain way? I guess I don't understand essentially what the end product will ultimately be.
Sure. So it's not so cut and dry. It is kind of set up to, again, rank these in order that you all feel is the most important, and kind of look to do that here, showing the benefits you can see in the second to last column, to sort of explain, and in the section of the report I sent to you all kind of was accompanied with a narrative for why the AG selected certain projects over others. So I think that's all information that the Board of Supervisors can then take, FCDOT staff can take, and as the funding becomes available, take a look at which of those high priority projects can be achieved most expediently. I think that allows some flexibility there. Mike, you came on camera. I didn't know if you wanted to say something to that.
I just also want to say we wanted to be mindful of the different communities that are participating in this process, and the quadrant approach seemed to allow for different communities' priorities to kind of come to light. So that's another reason why we had the quadrants. We're dealing with two supervisors here, so we wanted to also be fair in that regard as well.
Yeah, it's a good question though. And nice job presenting, by the way, Sonia, today.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure. Okay, so I'll kind of explain what we're looking at here because you can see there's a lot of different colors and numbers. The first table, the bigger table is, you all sent me your priorities and your list of justifications for those priorities. So I've produced a table here to reflect that. And if there's any feedback you all have on that, please let me know now so we can adjust this as necessary. But you can see I've got the projects listed, ranked for the southwest quadrant 1 through 4. In the first table, I've highlighted the map numbers. So we have 8, 7, 9, 6, 1, 3, and you can see 5 is in purple. That's because I took that recommendation from the northwest quadrant and combined it with that particular recommendation. So, some of the feedback that you all had given us was we don't want to look at this so piecemeal. We don't want to have a piecemeal approach. We want to try to address some of these issues comprehensively. And so you can see in the map number column where we've combined some of the recommendations together to try to produce something a little more comprehensive, a more comprehensive improvement. And then, as I mentioned, the benefits are sort of listed in the second to last column. Access to Metro Rail, of course, being one for a lot of these: pedestrian comfort, safety. Safety could probably be used across the board on most of these. And then we have a cost component. So again, these are high-level costs, and we have symbology here going from $1 sign all the way down to 4. So obviously 4 being the higher ticket items, and the cost range, for the lowest cost is $500,000 to $1 million, or to just under $1 million. Second highest cost, $1 million to just under $2 million, etc. So you can see sort of how those relative costs for these projects could compare. For the fourth ranked project, improving the sidewalk along Leesburg Pike from Idlewood Road to Falls Church Drive, that has sort of a variety in its cost component. You could see, maybe lower cost recommendation or lower cost improvement would just be, put in those high visibility crosswalks at the interchange ramps, install some flashing beacons at those locations. That's something that could be achieved relatively inexpensively, but of course, widening the sidewalk, which I think would be, the ultimate goal there, would obviously be a lot more expensive. So just sort of looking at the different options for that particular improvement. Then going on to the table below that, the community survey rankings, that's really just for your reference to see where the community ranked these projects. And for this quadrant in particular, the top 3 from the community survey are all kind of incorporated into the rankings that you all came up with for your priorities. And those are highlighted on the map as well. So again, yellow circles on the map are where the AG priorities are located. The purple is where we've kind of pulled a recommendation from another quadrant, and the blue are, the remainder of the recommendations. So any feedback on this quadrant? Anything that you think should be changed, edited? Bruce, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question. Are the lower priority items prioritized?
So the
That's-
ones in blue,
Yeah, the ones in blue, like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
they're not. I think that we could, we have that information from the community survey certainly, where they have all the recommendations prioritized. But the feedback I got from you all was really, what are your top priorities, not necessarily to rank each and every one, which I think would be a bit onerous. We are going to include, I've said this before, all the recommendations in the study report. But I think having, front and center, the ones that you all think are most important is really the key here.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks.
Mark, go ahead.
Jim, kind of going back to what Sonia said, and this option of grouping everything together versus quadrant. This is kind of an example where we could use some input from the county staff or something where we get the biggest bang for our buck, so to speak, in terms of safety and access. Just that's sharing a thought, because the one thing that bothers me a little bit about the advisory group rankings is that the crossing at the Route 66 ramps, it's really, really bad, unsafe, because there's not enough, safety markings for pedestrians and bicyclists. So I'm kind of thinking out loud here, but one thing to think about is to do an objective staff or independent kind of look to say, well, here, based on the situation, for relatively low investment, there's a significant improvement in access and safety. So that, not for discussion, but just for you to think about, because that number 4, it's kind of a merging of several things like you were describing. To me, it seems obvious, looking at it from the perspective of Pimmet Hills and over Lemon Road area, that's a big problem area.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't solve the bigger problem of the whole stretch, but it's scary to see pedestrians crossing there when I go by, or bicycles. Yeah. It's very dangerous.
And that's a really good point, Mark. And that's anything is up for discussion today with the rankings here. I mean, if you all feel that should move up, and keep in mind the community survey ranked that one at the top.
Yeah,
and you've just provided sort of a justification as to why that could be higher. So I definitely want to hear from you all on what you think of this order, and if things should be moved around, then we should decide that tonight.
Yeah, the reason, Tim, just to clarify my comment, the reason I pointed to that, I have my opinion on it that I shared, but if the staff has a way to independently say, hey, this, from our perspective as transportation planners,
Sure,
and infrastructure planners, the technical and analytical side of it, your biggest bang for the buck, or to maybe add that in here someplace.
yeah, I think we wanted, again, leave it in your hands. We're trying to make sure that this is really community driven, and what we've offered in past meetings is some data to sort of back up where these priority areas could be located. We looked at pedestrian level of comfort, for example, bicycle level of traffic stress. So kind of going back to those maps, you could see that this was an area that scored pretty poorly. That's not to say all the other ones that were selected are not important either, because number 6, for example, you're missing sidewalk on Gordon's and Chestnut. You're missing sidewalk on the north side of Shreve Road. So that's a gap. So just trying to balance, what you all hear from the community, what data we've provided thus far, and sort of the other resources we've given you to sort of make these decisions, and kind of hash it out here is what we're aiming to do. But we want to leave it up to you all to make that determination. I see, Bruce, I think you had your hand up next.
Yes, I have a question about Gordon's Road. So the map shows that walkway would be added on one block of Gordon's Road between Shreve Road and Chestnut Street. My question is whether any consideration has been given to making that walkway improvement 2 blocks long so that it would extend as far as Dale Drive and help collect pedestrian traffic there.
Sure, it certainly could be. I think we were just looking at kind of making the connection. You do have sidewalk in front of those townhomes, sort of approaching Shreve, and sort of making that connection from there to Chestnut, and then from Chestnut all the way up to where that intersection will be with, you know, the City of Falls Church development and Route 7. But if we think that it should be extended the length of Gordon's to Dale Drive, we can change that. That's obviously going to change the cost for that particular improvement. But
I would like to hear from Providence District persons about that.
Yeah.
I live on the Drainsville side. It's just a question that occurred to me. Do we have much representation from Providence District here tonight?
I saw Jeremy on. Jeremy, do you have any thoughts on that?
Maybe we can come back to him, Tim, as we start to call on people.
Sure.
And can I just, one thing for you also, while we're asking you to kind of put the priorities by quadrant, if you all feel that, and this goes back to Mark's question and Cheryl, if you all feel that, you know, some of these should come to the top and be the priority of the priority, that this is your document, we'll gladly make sure to put that in there for you. So if you think these 4 or 5 projects should be the priority and 3 are in one quadrant, you know, we definitely want to capture that because that's what we're asking this group to do.
Yeah, and Bruce, I'll follow up with Rob too. He's not here tonight, but he would also have some input on that, I imagine. So before we finalize this, definitely get everybody's input. And Sonia, I think you were up next.
Yeah. I don't live in that neighborhood, but I am a Providence District representative, or at least I live in one. I'm representing Families for Safe Streets, but clearly Jeremy or Rob would be better to have input on those sidewalks in the neighborhoods there. What I wanted to say is I really feel like the 4th ranked one, that pathway along the Leesburg Pike and as it goes under I-66 is really a critical connection. It's hard to sort of pick and choose between that and, you know, a sidewalk of a neighborhood that's going to be, you know, coming out right at the new development. But, you know, I think that pathway is along an arterial. It's going to be a critical point for folks coming from the Pennant Hills side down to the Metro and from Idlewood, and especially from Idlewood, you know, depending on what the situation ends up being with providing an access point to Metro that's more direct. If not, you know, providing that safe, comfortable path and the crossings of the ramps, I think is absolutely critical. We're dealing with an arterial here, and I think it's going to get a lot of pedestrian and bicycle activity. And those ramps and the path as it goes under the bridge is not great. So, you know, I'd like to see it further up in the ranking, but we start to split hairs here about which is more important, because it seems at this point they're all very important. But I would be inclined to sort of want to prioritize that a little bit higher. And certainly I agree with the ranking of number 1, that intersection needs to be fixed. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Sonia, out of curiosity, how much higher would you move number 4? Would you move it to number 2 or number 3?
I think, and I'd like to hear Jeremy's, you know, feedback on the Gordon's Road and Chestnut Street sidewalks, you know, whether or not they're doable, and whether or not, you know, what they feel in the community, but I would swap 4 and 3. I do think a sidewalk on the north side of Shreve is also very important. So I wouldn't really want to swap that out. I might swap it, but I mean, like I said, we're splitting hairs.
And I see, Jeremy, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, sorry, I missed earlier. Yeah, I think it's doable on one side of the road. I think we need to do something there, whether it's sidewalks or slowing cars or something, that there's going to be a crosswalk that goes into the development that right there. So it's going to drive the corner where the Don Buyer lot will eventually be redeveloped. And that is the main thoroughway for the community to get to the metro. They either have to go down to Shreve or cut through that area. And so I think I'm concerned about more cars coming through there when there's a new light there. It's not safe. We did a speed study. It's eligible for a speed hump, but there's only one location, and it doesn't work for the location, and so we don't have another option there. And so I think I'm flexible with how we get there to make it safer. It is a very narrow road. There's no way for a resident and a car to walk down to be in the street together, and so I think we need to figure out how to make it work.
And Jeremy, I don't know if you were on for the first part of this, but I had mentioned that Mike and I had talked to VDOT about piloting the slow streets concept that we discussed in an earlier meeting. Chestnut and Gordon's came up as a potential candidate. I don't know if you think that would be something that community would be willing to try or would be open to as a potential solution.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's definitely a concern about the road speed. It's just not to the point that people want to sign off on a speed hump. So there's really not another option to give to folks. And so I think an alternative to a speed hump would be welcomed.
Okay. So would you advocate then for keeping this ranking in the order that we have it, or moving Leesburg Pike?
I think either one is fine. I would be comfortable with switching them. I'm not as familiar with the walking conditions on that side.
Okay. And I do see Cheryl, I think you've had your hand up, so you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I think there are two issues here. One is, I think this report or study, even when we're talking about the quadrants, would be enhanced if you had data. And the fact of the matter is we're going to have 2,200 new residential units on Haycock Road leading into the corner. And many of those people are not going to have cars. Many of them are going to be walking, and they'll probably be walking on Leesburg Pike. So I'm a big supporter of the improvements on Leesburg Pike. And I think, Tim, you and I have had exchanges about this before, that it might make more sense to have, look at some of these things as larger segments. So instead of trying to say, this portion of Leesburg Pike is more important than the intersection, why don't you just have a Leesburg Pike entry where all of this is put together, because all of these things need to be done. And, as for the situation on Chestnut and Gordon, for a number of reasons that I won't get into, people from that area started to reach out to me in June, and I started to, hear from them and listen to them a bit more. And again, this is where some data-driven figures might be of importance when you're starting to prioritize across quadrants. If Chestnut Road is going to have some 900 vehicles going down it per day as a result of the developments or whatever it's going to be, it might make the case stronger if we actually saw some of that data. So again, maybe we shouldn't be trying to micromanage that section of Leesburg Pike, maybe we should be looking at it as simply one segment that should be considered as one large project. Just a thought.
Sure. No, that's a fair point. I think in doing the segments, we have to also be mindful that some of this might be a little bigger than we can chew off at one point in time. So I think that was the reasoning behind kind of separating those two. The City of Falls Church, for one, is improving the frontage along Leesburg Pike for their project, so you can kind of see where it's split there between 8 and 1 and 3 and 5. So there's one reason for that. As far as the data-driven approach, though, you're absolutely right. I think that's something that we've shown in the past is really the advisory group and other members of the community have focused their attention on these major roads because they're higher levels of traffic. So, you have 900 potentially vehicles on Chestnut Street in the future, but you're going to have 50,000 plus on Leesburg Pike.
But my point also, Tim, is you're going to have more pedestrians. I know that might be a harder thing to quantify, but if you're going to have 2,200 residential units and you're going to have the attractive nuisances at the corner in the Falls Church City project, more so than the others, you're going to really increase the pedestrian traffic, which again argues in favor of these improvements all the way along Leesburg Pike and within that neighborhood. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, those are all good points, and I think that's where you all need to just kind of decide what you think will have, again, as I think Mark put it, the biggest bang for the buck. But these are all valid points to make.
Can I just follow up on that? So Cheryl, real quick, would you say, projects 1, 5, 3, and 8, make them all Leesburg Pike and say Leesburg Pike, that whole project should be as one? Is that what I hear?
I would do it that way, but
Okay.
I'm just one voice here.
Well,
that's okay.
That's what this is showing, though, actually. Maybe I wasn't very clear on that point, but yeah, we've combined 1, 3, and 5 into that number 4 ranking.
Oh, I support that. I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, again, others might have other views.
Okay, Bruce is next.
Wait, Bruce, you're up.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I would argue for raising the Leesburg Pike projects to number 3. An advantage to that project is that there's so few property owners along that stretch that there would be much less resistance to a project. Whereas if along Gordon's Road, there's individual properties, there's got to be probably acquisition of property and so on. I just think it would be much less complicated along Route 7. So just wanted to throw out that comment. Thanks.
Okay, those are fair points too. Thanks, Bruce. So it sounds like we pretty much have agreement on that then, so we can make that adjustment, move number 4 up, which I think makes sense. You all justified it well. Okay, so if there are no more comments on the southwest quadrant, I think we can move on to the next one. Okay, and again, you're seeing sort of the same layout here. I'll note the 4th ranked project here, we combined 2 and 8. So that was looking at Red Road, that sidewalk connection on part of Red Road, and then the crossing. Of course, I mentioned the crossing could potentially be taken care of in a federal grant if we're lucky. But combining those two into one project. This one I did want to get the group's feedback on because I know we were a little split on number 7 on the map and the 3rd ranked project for the advisory group, and that's the pathway through the Metro Rail station from Idlewood Road. So I wanted to get some thoughts on that, whether we think that's appropriately ranked, as well as the other one being the pathway from Pimmit Drive to Lemon Road. That's number 1 on the map. That one, there's a stairwell. Mira, I know you're familiar with this one. coming from Pimmit Drive down to the Lemon Road Park, it is very steep. It is sort of wedged between two properties. And so I don't know that it's necessarily doable to make it ADA accessible. If so, I think it would probably be relatively costly. So I'm wondering if ADA accessibility to the school is the issue that we're looking to solve for, if the Red Road improvements, along with the potential TPP to kind of make that connection between both sides of Red Road, could help kind of solve that issue, or if we think that it might be worth spending the money to sort of make that stairwell ADA accessible if it's feasible. So Mira, I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that, since this is really sort of your turf. If you
Yeah.
wanted to.
So also just because I'm representing Lemon Road, even though Lemon Road is located on Idlewood, it's a split feeder school, but it is primarily Pimmit Hills, like almost over 80-90%. There's just a small portion of us that go to the Longfellow McLean pyramid on this side. So there's a majority of our population is Pimmit Hills, and I just kept getting so many remarks about parents that have children at Lemon Road, and when they go to walk to pick up their kids, they have their sibling in a stroller, and it's nearly impossible to get down that steep. And I went over there the other day and I took some more pictures. I know you sent out a picture in the email, but it is a very difficult stairway, and I don't know how you're gonna make it ADA accessible, but I do know that is like a top, I mean, it's just something that whole community, I think, would benefit from to access the school. So I know you're saying making the connection down at Red Road. That is a little bit further down than the majority of what's zoned to Lemon Road. I mean, obviously they could, then walk down, cross over, and then walk back up to the school. So yeah, I don't know how it would be possible to make it, like, I don't know if you would have to like zigzag it. I do know there's a new house going up,
Right.
like I think on either side, so I don't even know what are the property lines there. But yeah, I just got a lot of feedback about that, and the thought of it being ADA like really excited people, like beyond anything else. So yeah, that's just really, my feedback from it.
Okay. With that being said, I think that's sort of the challenge we're facing in this quadrant with the two that I mentioned is sort of the feasibility aspect with that one, and then with the route through the rail yard. So I don't want to set unreasonable expectations, certainly.
Right.
It's something, if people feel that is the top priority, could be studied. But I think if there's an easier, cheaper way to do it, and making that connection from Red Road would certainly be, I think, cheaper. I walked that area myself, went down the stairwell. We would also need to make ADA accommodations on the bridge. I think there's 3 stairs leading up to the bridge in the Lemon Road Park, and then getting up to the school itself obviously is pretty
It's
steep.
just one big ramp, yeah.
Yeah. So that's sort of my take on it. But again, this is it's up to you all to decide what to do with this. But I do see the Red Road as sort of being a reasonable alternative if you all think that's acceptable.
Right. Yeah. It is a reasonable alternative to it. Yeah.
And Bruce, I think you had Bruce Jones. Did you have your hand up next? Sorry if I'm getting the order wrong.
It's fine. I think we'll just go with that. Bruce Jones.
Bruce, you may be muted.
I want to endorse what Mira said about the first rank project. The location of that bridge leading to Lemon Road Park and Lemon Road School, it's much more conveniently located for the catchment area for the school children than Red Road. It would be somewhat out of the way for them to go to Red Road. there is an example of how the steepness of the slope can be handled. There's an existing path built about a year ago leading from the Falls Church Little League fields behind Westgate School. It leads basically from McGarity Road along Scotts Run to the McLean Metro Station. And they've successfully navigated the slope by having a series of S curves, switchbacks, so to speak. So there are engineering solutions to that problem. I'd also like to comment on the third rank project, the one from Idlewood Road to the Metro Rail station. One aspect is that because of Wilmada's security requirements, the tool report found that the only feasible route would be a fishhook-shaped loop. And one aspect of the loop that was identified is that it would go through an area along Idlewood Road, on the east side of Idlewood Road, which is planted with vegetation, which is committed by Wilmada as part of land use undertakings. The original special exception back in the 1980s and updated by a more recent special exception amendment. That area has evergreen plantings that serves as visual and noise buffer between the rail yard and the residential community on the west side of Idlewood Road. And building a path through that area would diminish that buffering. And I expect that would be a concern for the local Lemon Road Civic Association. I also have a question. Can you tell us a little bit about the plan for Appendix F, which is mentioned on page 50 of the report? That's related to this proposal.
Oh, is that in, sorry, I can't remember. Is that for the tool design report? I don't have it open, sorry.
Yeah, it says a feasibility for this connection was conducted in 2011,
Yep.
which may be consulted. Additional details on the study can be found in Appendix F. So is the plan to reproduce the tool report in its entirety as Appendix F, or would that be a summary tool report?
Yeah, we would have the attached tool report appended to the report, the active transportation study report, that is, so that if, for example, this ranked pretty high in the community survey, but if, for example, we decide, the AG doesn't want to rate this as high due to a lot of the indicators that you mentioned, cost and taking away sort of that buffer security. We have that, and then we have kind of an outline from Tool's report in 2011 as to what this might actually look like if it were, kind of implemented. So I think having that background data for people that aren't as familiar with it would be helpful to have in the report. So that was kind of the intent of including that in the appendix.
I'm glad to hear that, because having that in the appendix, that would alleviate some of my concern about this presentation.
So on that note, and then sorry, and we can jump to Jane because you have your hand raised. Between Bruce and Mira, would you advocate then for sort of moving that recommendation lower, the connection through the rail yard, that is?
I think Mira and I have different views on this.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think it should be the top by no means. But I think there is a growing interest in this than what was back 10 years ago. And
Okay.
yes, I know all the hurdles to get there, and the price and everything, but yeah.
Okay, Jane, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to propose that the advisory group might want to look at this quadrant. If you look at the project ranked number 1 and number 4 in the advisory group rankings, God willing, those projects will get funded. Number 1 is considered a quick fix from the 5 million that the board authorized as part of the 100 million. And then, as Tim said, number 4 is part of the grant application to the feds. So I'm wondering if we take those out and say a good chance of being, keep the priority, but perhaps then maybe prioritize the remaining ones. And maybe they are, 2, 3, 5, but the fact that there is identified funding for those 2 projects gives a different construct to how we rank them, perhaps.
When will you know the results of the application for that?
Well, if you're talking about the federal grant, God willing, sometime in our lifetime, but I mean, it's not imminent once you, make an application. I can, maybe Tom Bashadny knows that. With the pedestrian refuge, the 5 million is there. The county has identified, FDOT has identified projects that are considered quick fixes, meaning no utilities have to be moved, no right-of-way has to be acquired. And the projects cut across all districts. The 5 million probably won't cover every project listed, but I would think that that this one would be high on the list and could be done fairly quickly.
Number
Tom,
1, yeah, the refuge.
Tom, do you have any information on the grant timing?
So the grants are due on Thursday. So I would imagine we'll hear something early 2023. Assuming there will get a lot of applications and they'll need to sort through those. This is the federal government, USDOT. So I would say probably first quarter of 2023.
And Tom, when do you think the decision, I know part of how many projects you can do with the 5 million will depend on how much each project costs. When do you have a sense for which projects will be covered with the 5 million?
If there's consensus on the board, probably we would be taking some forward in October.
I'm sorry?
Formal. If there's consensus on the board, we'll probably take something forward in October, November of this year on that. Okay. And that's obviously it's locally funded, so there's a lot more control over that.
Right. I mean, we're talking projects similar to Westmoreland and Hopewood, that kind of project, which maybe didn't move as quickly as we all wanted, but it moved fairly quickly compared to other projects.
And do you know the status of the pedestrian pathway connecting the end of Red Road to, I know that's been approved and budgeted, but it doesn't look like maybe the money has been allocated to that project?
Which project is that, Mira?
At the other side of Red Road, connecting over to Pemmon Hills, just a pedestrian pathway.
Let me check on that. I don't think I've gotten a status report recently on that.
That would be a pedestrian bridge over the Pemmon Run stream.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That there was a multi-agency meetings a few months ago about that project. So it is still in the capital projects division of FDOT being scoped. One concern that came out of that, what's called the initial project review, is building a bridge where there are overhead wires very, at least according to some FDOT folks, very difficult, very problematic about how you can even get the equipment in to build the bridge. So that project is funded, and it's in the design scoping division of FDOT.
All right, thank you, Jane. And Ben, it looks like you had your hand up.
Thanks, Tim. One suggestion maybe the group could consider is just including a note about, just stating that these quick hit projects may, may be funded soon. And so you just kind of pull them off. And then if for whatever reason they don't move forward, we still have it memorialized in the report if that's a concern, folks. The other thing related to the connection through the rail yard, I would certainly advocate, if there's a lot of interest or support in the community for it, even though it may not be something that is feasible in the short term, it's still, I think, very important to reflect the support for that project, because this is going to be a document that is going to be referenced, over the years. And certainly, I think one of the things that people will do is work their way from the top to the bottom. And so at a certain point, I think, whether there be more funding made available or an engineering solution, I think we will get that project eventually.
Any more comments on these? Let's see, I think
Bruce Wright.
Bruce, go ahead.
Yeah, just to point out the obvious, that connection through the rail yard is basically accomplishing what would be done along Route 7 if that could be improved, because we're really talking about moving folks from the Pimmet Hill area to the other side of the interstate. And so there's two projects that are fairly high that are trying to accomplish the same thing. So if 7 isn't done, it just means that, 7, the rail yard connection, if that isn't done, it just means that the Route 7 connection is that much more important.
Yeah, I highly agree with that, because if I live right here at Red, and if I can't cross at the Metro Rail, if Leesburg Pike was made to be, a much safer route to go, that we could all easily do that, but right now that pathway is horrible, very dangerous. So I definitely agree with what Bruce Wright said there. If, that is an alternative, and if that's ranked high in the other quadrant, it kind of serves its purpose for this Metro Rail connection. It's just one block over, making that pathway.
Yeah, these are all good points. So one final thing I just wanted to mention, and Bruce Jones, you said that potentially doing S curves and switchbacks on map number 1, the connection from Pimmet to Lemon Road Park. I think that the concern there is, again, kind of the limitations of space between the two properties. So that's why I just raised that one again, just to see if I don't want to get folks kind of get their hopes up that this is something that can be done. I'm not saying that we shouldn't study it and shouldn't sort of put it forward. Again, this is your study, but I just wanted to add that bit of information as well, just because it is something that you may want to consider when kind of looking at these projects. But if you all are comfortable with the order of these, that's totally fine. We can move on to the next one. So any further comments before we move on this one? Okay. So we'll stick with the order on the northwest. Now going over to the northeast. This is the one quadrant where there is sort of a divergence between what the community survey saw as its top priorities and what the advisory group selected. Again, not a huge divergence. You can see number 4 on the map. That was actually one of the highest ranked improvements in the survey, and with the AG, that's the adding high visibility crosswalks to Great Falls Street and Haycock Road. I added that in with the next quadrant as sort of a comprehensive project for Haycock Road, so that's included. But The other two from the community survey, constructing a sidewalk on the east side of Great Falls Street, north of Hutchinson Street. You can see that's number 2, the blue number 2 on the map. And then adding a mid-block crosswalk over Great Falls Street to access Dimmitt Stream Valley Park. That's the blue number 1 on the map. Those were 2 of the higher ranked community survey projects versus what the advisory group saw as priorities. The mid-block crossing at Casemont, the intersection improvements to Westmoreland, the mid-block crossing at Great Falls and Hutchinson Street. And you all provided me with good justifications for those. So Casemont Drive, obviously getting kids across the street to the path along Haycock Road. That's a good justification for having that project as a priority. It's also closer to the metro station. Intersection improvements at Westmoreland and Haycock. Obviously, again, you have the school right there, so that makes sense. Improving pedestrian access to school. And as well as the mid-block crossing on Great Falls and Hutchinson. So crossing over Great Falls Street, including a sidewalk on Hutchinson Street, at least for a block, to get the folks that live there over to the other side of Great Falls, and then on their way over to Haycock Elementary School or Longfellow Middle School. So those were some of the justifications that I received from you all on those projects. I think those make sense. But if we want to talk about that a little more and sort of the community survey responses in relation to the ones you selected. Cheryl, I don't know if you were first. You can go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I would just, you're talking about access to the metro, and I would put that actually in this report where you have benefit access to school safety. I would encourage you to just add access to the metro. This has been a neighborhood that has walked to the metro for the past 3 decades. It remains a top priority for us to be able to access the metro safely. And, not seeing metro there is a bit problematic for us. Again, this falls into, my desire to look at things as segments, which, of course, Casemont would then be just part of the overall improvements on Haycock between Great Falls and Westmoreland Street. Otherwise, I'm not going to try to explain why people in our area were very baffled by the survey. They were baffled by why Fairfax County Public Parks Authority actually put that one project in. And of course, I think people think, oh yeah, getting to a park is good, but that's pretty far away from where we already have people walking. Biking, different situation to the metro, walking slightly out of hands. But I, generally speaking, would just encourage you to put in that reference to accessing the metro, as well as, again, the attractions that are going to be built in the new developments. People will be walking. People already walk to the restaurants in that giant shopping center, et cetera, and Lazy Mike's. So people walk, and I think it's important that be noted already. Thanks.
Yep, no, that was an omission on my part. I should have included that in the benefits, so I'll add that in. The one note I'll make about number 1 on the map, access to Pimmitt Park, Pimmitt Run Park, that is. I agree with you. I agree with sort of the direction the advisory group is going in, and these improvements are proximate to metro versus the one that's sort of on the outskirts of the 1 mile radius. I don't think we want to invalidate the results of the survey though, and there are people that feel it's important. So it is important to a lot of people. So I think we should still make note of that in the report and say that this is something that we do want to address. It's not the priority for this study. It's not something that the advisory group is seeing as an essential project to connecting to metro and the schools in the area. But I think it's still worth noting in the report to say the community really sees this as a valid opportunity to improve access to trails and parks. So just making that note. Who do we have next? So,
you want to try Michael?
Oh, Michael, go ahead. I saw you jump on the screen.
Oh, someone else had their hands raised before me, so please call on them.
Okay. I was just trying to go with people who haven't spoken yet. So.
I'll
We can go.
I'll wait my turn.
Okay. Well, next up is Mark Kiefer.
Okay.
Tim, you already have taken note of what Cheryl said. I agree very much that access to Metro and new and existing amenities sort of goes with all of these priorities. And the point about the park access, it's hard to disagree with improving access to the park. But what it causes me to do is say, well, there's some things that we should do to improve access to Haycock Longfellow Park. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
When I was looking at this, I didn't push ideas about the park, even though it's kind of within well within the radius. So it's kind of to add to what you were saying. Well, put in the crossing at Pimmick Creek there, Pimmick Stream. Well, I would respond by saying add, a general point about improving access to parks within the study area, including Haycock Longfellow. Not the debate or the importance, but your rationale for including the Pimmick Stream crossing causes me to expand kind of the scope of what I was thinking about and say, well, if you're going to say that, why don't you say this? And I don't know that we should get into that because of the distant location of the Pimmick Stream crossing. I mean, you can put it in, but then I would like you to note a more general point about, and I can give you some specifics on Haycock Longfellow if you want.
Okay. Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think any of the recommendations that you all can come up with for this area are fair game. But now we're kind of at the point where we're prioritizing all these. We had started with 44. We've got it narrowed down to the top 16 that the AG kind of selected here. So, yeah, I think anything that we can identify is good, and it's just a matter of sort of addressing the ones that we think, again, will make the biggest impact. And so that's what we're doing here. I think we had Sonia next.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to ask, is number 4 looped in with another segment? Is that why it's in purple and not
Yes.
the intersection of Great Falls and Haycock? Yeah.
Yep.
Because I was like, that has to be a priority.
Yeah.
But it's in the other quadrant. Is that it?
Right. That's looped in with the top rank priority on the next quadrant.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. That's it. I just wanted to check on that.
Mm-hmm. And I think we had Bruce Wright up next.
Yeah, quick question about the mid-block crosswalks. Motorist compliance at those is notoriously bad if there's just a crosswalk. Are there any other devices proposed at those, such as a hawk signal or some other kind of pedestrian activated signal?
So I think we would want to include an RFB, I think, or some sort of pedestrian signal in most cases. We can state that with this recommendation. I don't think I didn't in this particular recommendation, but we can include that.
Okay.
I don't know that they're going to apply in all cases. Again, that's something we'd have to talk about with VDOT and whether or not they're appropriate in certain locations, and of course the actual location of the crosswalk itself is subject to change a little bit. But I think having the idea that we want a mid-block crosswalk on Haycock Road near Casemont Drive, and we want there to be some sort of enhanced visual indication, whether that be an RFB or something else, we can kind of add that in there too.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Michael, now you're up.
I think Sonia answered my question about purple number 4. So I think we have the priorities correct here. This gets us the most bang for our buck safety wise for the school between Westmoreland and Great Falls in that little, block and a half or so radius, and then I'll reserve any comment for purple number 4 going into the bridge going across 66 for the next and I believe final quadrant. Thanks.
Okay, sure. All right, so I think we're set with this one. Moving on to the last quadrant. And so again, looking at the top ranked project, no surprise, it's the pathway along Haycock Road, and we've sort of incorporated a couple of the other recommendations into that. So you can see again in the map number column, we've taken number 4 from the northeast quadrant and combined 3 and 2. So 2 was the crosswalk over Turner Avenue. So just kind of holistically improving the pathway from Great Falls Street to the Metro Access Road along Haycock Road, and then installing high visibility crosswalks on all legs of the intersection at Great Falls Street, as well as on Turner Avenue. So that was the top priority for you all. It was also the top priority for the community survey. They had also included constructing sidewalk along Turner Avenue to from Grayson Place to Haycock Road, and I believe that's the second one there. So yeah, I think what you all had selected as your priorities really closely align with the community survey. One that I did want to bring up was the sidewalk along one side of Mount Daniel Drive. I think, I can't remember who it was now, but somebody had said that maybe that project had been put forward at one point or another, and was not agreeable to the community or the folks that lived along that stretch of Mount Daniel Drive. So I want to maybe get some clarification on that, and see if you all feel that that project should be included in this ranking, or whether we should remove that. Cheryl, I think you're up first.
Yeah, thank you. That's my question. I shared the report with a number of people, including several who live in the Ellison Heights, Mount Daniel Drive area, and they were a bit surprised to see this because they said it didn't come from them. And I frankly don't remember us talking about it either. So, you know, I didn't do a great survey of the area, but people were wondering where this came from. I don't remember it being on the survey, but I don't remember every project that was on the survey. So there are some questions about that. And the other thing is I've had a recent exchange with Evan Goldman about his plans for bicycles and sidewalk access on Haycock, but only as far. EYA doesn't plan to do anything once he hits the overpass. So I'm just wondering at this point, where is the bridge right now? Is that on another page? I guess maybe it's on another page, but I really think we're missing the bridge in this particular chart, unless I'm just not reading it right.
Oh, so the bridge is included. So this takes Haycock Road all the way up to the Wilmada site. So from
Okay.
Great Falls to Wilmada,
Okay,
the
so I'm
Wilmada
just
site.
my eyes are just a little bit blurry, but in
It's hard
any
to read the
case,
map, yeah.
do you have and can you share with us what EYA is proposing?
So they have.
I'd like to see how it would mesh.
Sure. So I know they're still in discussions with how they want to sort of configure that area leading up to the bridge. One idea I think they had was to kind of include a shared use path through what they're calling a dog park. If you can kind of see where Mike's outlining there with his hand, which would be separate from the existing sidewalk. I'm not sure how staff feels about that. Again, I'm not the reviewer on the case, but we're definitely looking to kind of have that discussion with the rezoning staff on whether or not that's appropriate. But they are looking at kind of enhancing in some way or another that connection along their frontage. So from the bridge to the Metro access road that Mike is kind of highlighting there. But that's still sort of being discussed, and we haven't really solidified a solution there. If that's helpful. I think Michael, you were up next.
Yeah, I just had a question. I sent a fairly detailed email on August 1st. I brought it up, Tim, to yourself and a few other folks, not the entire group, where I kind of went to VDOT's list of approved products for kind of barriers, for sand, for water. There's easily kind of options that, seem to be somewhat inexpensive. I don't know if that's in the Wilmada proposal. Does that email, does like all of that feedback get presented to the Fairfax County, to Wilmada? Kind of like where do those emails go? Because it seems like there's solutions right there in front of us that we don't need to necessarily reinvent the wheel, to improve the bridge safety kind of ASAP, at least in the short term, while there might be longer terms, an engineering study might take years and years, but you get some of those plastic barriers filled with water or sand.
Right.
They hit the static and dynamic weight ratings, which I presume someone's already done fairly recently, and those can be installed, and we have safe bicyclists, at least by springtime. So I just wanted to see like where all that information, where that goes and who it gets sent along to.
Right. So I kind of roll that into the narrative piece. So the sections 10 and 11 that I had sent out to you all kind of included these charts and then sort of a narrative. Probably the most extensive narrative was on this improvement because we've talked about a number of different solutions, like you mentioned. Some of these could be short-term, easier fixes, like the temporary barriers. So that's something that could be considered if this gets selected for funding when it becomes available. Is it something that can be part of a short-term solution? I know the advisory group has indicated on this that I think they'd like to see a wider sidewalk. So, really more of a long-term solution in place along the bridge. But we have kind of codified in the narrative where there are opportunities for those more quick fixes, I guess you could say. Probably not to the level of detail of, the specific delineators that they would use or barriers, but kind of getting to that point.
Well, I don't mean to. I just want one follow up though. The picture that I sent in my August 1st email, is of Haycock Road going over the bridge.
Mhm.
And even if you widen the sidewalk, there's still no barrier between the cars and the sidewalk. So, I mean, right now, going both ways, it's at least probably a car length and a half's width, because at the funnel point of each end, it's basically wide enough for two cars, and then it kind of funnels down a bit. But it's still probably, at least on the one side, it might even be two lanes going westbound. We could widen the sidewalk, I get that, but that still leaves pedestrians or bicyclists exposed.
Right.
So that still doesn't really solve to me, the main issue. Like, yeah, we want it a little wider, but at least for the current width, before we start pouring concrete and doing all that and ripping up the road, can't we just get some barriers there to protect the people? Like in the meantime, I guess it just seems obvious to me, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, no, and that's what we've kind of suggested. I'm pulling up the narrative now, but yeah, one of the kind of recommendations, kind of bullet points for that recommendations, I should say, is to include some sort of jersey barrier or a delineator to sort of enhance that vertical separation, so to speak, to enhance that the comfort of that walkway. So you're right, not just including sidewalk, but actually kind of enhancing the separation there with something like that. That's rolled into the recommendation in the report. And I don't know who we had next. One thing I wanted to mention about the Mount Daniel Drive. So I'm pulling up the spreadsheet now. So I had Bruce Jones and Sonia, not to call you both out, but I think you had indicated that you want to see the improvement of Mount Daniel Drive on the list. And it was Robert Boggs. I don't know. Is he here today? I don't see him on. I thought I saw him earlier.
I didn't see him.
Okay. He was the one who indicated that he did not want to see that on the priority list. So I don't know if we have any feedback from Sonia or Bruce Jones on whether or not you think it's appropriate to take that one off or to leave that one on. Again, this is the sidewalk on Mount Daniel Drive.
I'm looking at the recommendations that I shared with you, and I don't remember including that one. I don't think it was me, but I'll double check, but I don't have a problem. You know, if that's something the community isn't interested, that's up to them. Yeah, because that was an access to school, essentially. I mean, I guess it is also access to the metro, but I don't have an opinion on that.
Okay.
I have some feedback on some other things that I want to discuss, but we can stay focused on that one first and get the other person's answer.
Okay. Yeah, Bruce, did you have comments on that one?
I would just say that I will defer to people who live in that area, which does not include me.
Okay. Okay, so I think it's safe to say we could take that one off. Okay, that's helpful. And then, Sonia, you said you had some other feedback on this quadrant.
Yeah. I just looked at the recommendations I shared, and I did not add. I had Grove Ave trail maintenance, but I didn't indicate.
Okay.
So that's fine. What I wanted to talk about was number 13. You know, the road diet. I know that I saw in your materials that you shared that you get into it a little bit later on, and I don't know if this is going to be discussed, you know, with the advisory group, but you know, as we talk about sort of taming Haycock in a way that makes it safer and provides access for people walking and biking, I do believe, I was just, you know, assessing that, and there's just so much asphalt there that I see that it didn't necessarily make this group of rankings, but I really do believe that would be a benefit to that area and provide space for more protected bike lanes or buffered bike lanes, or perhaps expanded sidewalks, and could connect up and over the bridge. I haven't heard much of the plans that Cheryl was mentioning as how a path or whatever EYA is proposing in that corner. But certainly, and I think, you know, subsequent, when we get into the 2-mile radius, we talk about bike lanes on Haycock. But I think a road diet would really offer to provide a more comfortable and safe experience on that section of roadway, and continue to advocate for that, as I really feel it should be a priority given its location close to the metro and just the size of the roadway now. So,
yeah, that's. I'm glad you brought that one up. I do believe that was. Sorry, I'm ruffling some papers here. I think that was actually ranked fairly high on the community survey, the road diet, that is. So I don't know if anybody else has thoughts on that, whether they think that should be included in this list, to sort of, again, make the connection along Haycock Road.
do you have the images that are in, like, I don't know if you put them on a slide or not. I thought that the graphics that you shared in the draft document were really helpful in visualizing if folks don't really fully grasp what we're talking about when we say a road diet.
Sure. Yeah, let me share my screen real quick. Sorry, Mike. I'm gonna grab
You
it.
want to do it or you want me to do it?
Oh, if you have it up, sure.
Yeah, I think I have it. Give me a moment.
Okay.
This is what you sent to the AG, right?
Yep.
Is that it right there?
That's it. Yep.
Okay. What page are you looking for?
I think it's towards the bottom, the road diet.
I'm going. Sorry.
Yeah,
Taking
it's
a
the- like 20 pages. So there it is. I think it was above that.
Oh, you want to go up? Sorry. Okay.
Yeah. There it is. Yeah. So this is what we're talking about. Basically, a concept is, again, you're taking travel lanes away for vehicular traffic, that is, and reallocating that space for pedestrians. That's basically the concept of a road diet. This is sort of, really good example. You can see kind of looking at a car-oriented street on the left and a multimodal street on the right. They've included bike lanes. They've bumped the curb out, included street trees and on-street parking and a dedicated bus lane. And these are all sorts of different things you could do by kind of, again, giving that space to the pedestrian and bike realm. And I know that was popular with the community when we.
Could I make
had
a
the
quick
meeting.
comment about that?
Yes.
Yeah, there was a road diet done on Lawyers Road, one of the first in the county. And it was controversial. There were a lot of people saying it would ruin the road, but it's proven to be very effective. And the big thing that isn't mentioned in your write-up is that crashes were reduced by 70% in the first couple of years. And it's a national model. There was a write-up that I think FHWA did on that project. So they can be very successful and provide room for other road users.
Yeah, there's definitely the safety aspect, and I can certainly edit the report to include that in there. It's a good comment. Not sure who we had next. Maybe Cheryl?
Yeah, thank you. Again, this kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about looking at things a little bit more holistically. I think anytime we talk about doing something on the overpass, that the road diet is almost understood by a number of us to be included in it, at this point in time. And again, certainly if EYA is doing something with bicycle lanes on the 4-lane portion of that road, we really do need to understand how that hooks up with our non-existent bicycle lanes on our side. So I would just encourage you to work it into whatever you have in that. It's kind of, you don't have it up anymore, but it's already a little bit wordy on the recommendation, but I think you could fix that by just, improve pathway to metro access, let's see, including road diet, you just add that up there because that's access to metro rail and the new developments and shopping, etc. So it's really one of those really important things that we've all talked about at great length.
So for this one specifically, the top ranked project, we were looking at Great Falls to Metro Access Road. And then I believe when we've talked about the road diet, it's kind of always been envisioned to be from that point on until the City of Falls Church boundary. So we would need to do, some sort of a road diet or, take away some space from the vehicles on the bridge itself, of course, to be able to expand that sidewalk. So for that portion, certainly. But I think what the road diet recommendation for Haycock Road was really looking at is that area south of Metro Access Road. So leading into the City of Falls Church, where you have, really expansive roadway, and sort of improving that segment.
Okay, because that's not really something that we focused on, I don't think. I always thought road diet referred to the overpass, but again, that argues for us to see what EYA is proposing.
Well, I don't know if it's something that we haven't focused on necessarily. I know we've talked about road diets in past meetings, and certainly it's come up that Haycock Road is wide, and what could we do with that extra space if we studied, what it would take to remove a through lane in each direction. So,
Tim, I'm sorry to interrupt, but if that's the case and Haycock is really wide, I'm afraid that there's going to be a lot of difficulty getting out of some of the condo communities that don't have stoplights And, maybe VDOT and everybody ought to be looking at some type of median strip so that cars have a safe place to turn left. That's going to be really difficult when we have the additional vehicles that are projected in the TIAs. And if you've got some 12,000 coming from the Falls Church City project, 4,000 coming from the Wilmada project, and another 4,000 potentially coming from the VTech HIT project, that's a lot of vehicles, especially for those condo communities and also the people who live on Grove and Highland, and there's really no safe place. So anyway, I'm a little bit surprised by this right now because I really don't think we talked about it, but I could be wrong. So it's just something else that can be thrown into the mix, but I'm not sure we really talked about it.
Well, right now as it stands, it's not on the advisory group rankings. So Sonia had mentioned this being a maybe a worthwhile project, and we can discuss that. So it's up to the group what the consensus is. I was just kind of mentioning that we have talked about it, and I believe it was, as far as the community survey goes, was kind of ranked high. And I know we heard at the community meeting that people were interested in the concept. So again, it's really up to you all to decide where you want to rank these.
Tim, do you want a satellite imagery at all to try to explain it a little bit more, or do you not? Would it help the group?
Can I actually add a little something about?
Sure.
Because
Yes,
usually
please.
with a road diet, you have a center turn lane that provides for turning movements. So that way it actually gives space for cars making turning movements to get them out of the flow of traffic and helps to keep the other travel lanes flowing. So it actually does provide some space for people needing to make turns because it's 3 lanes. It's 2 travel lanes and then the center sort of turn lane, but then it's the sides that are used for other users. So I just wanted to say that just to clarify that a little bit. That's all. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Sonia. And I think we have Michael up next.
No, I forgot to lower my hand. I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. And Mark.
Hey, Tim, just following up about the road diet. I don't think it should be included on the list because of what Cheryl said, it's not something we really considered. And as you said, when we were talking or using that term, we were referring to the bridge, to the bridge westbound to the access road, and whether or not, narrowing it to 1 lane or tapering it would be part of the solution. So the other thing to mention about road diet as far as public input, and I tend to agree with this, is if you narrow, and I'm not a traffic engineer, if you narrow Haycock, it will cause traffic backups. And I'm not a car advocate or fanatic, but the sidewalks there are quite good. It's a newer stretch of road. It is wide. There are traffic lights to slow people down. But so I'm just speaking up to say, let's move on.
Sure. Okay. Just to clarify again, the road diet recommendation, that would be subject to a traffic study. So we would need to see what impact going from 4 lanes to 3 would have on the surrounding traffic. Again, I don't want to. It's still going to be a recommendation in the study. You all are choosing not to prioritize it. That's fine. But I wanted to include it at least in some of the other things that we talked about: slow streets, road diet.
That's fine.
And
okay. To mention the community meeting, there was a woman that lives closer there, across, I guess it's on the south side of Haycock there, and she spoke very specifically about concerns if you narrow the road, as Cheryl said, getting out becomes a problem. So enough on that. Thank you.
Sure. Bruce Jones, you're up next.
Yes, I have a question about the shared use pathway. Are you planning to demarcate bicycle lanes to separate cyclists from pedestrians?
Not, so you're talking about the shared use path along Haycock. I don't think that could be included. I think you would need a little bit more width, and therefore the property impacts would be greater. So I think what I noted in the narrative, at least for this recommendation in the report that I sent you guys, was looking at a 10-foot shared use path along Haycock Road leading up to the Metro Access Road. And the reason for that is, again, to allow for cyclists to travel along Haycock Road off street. Haycock Road is pretty narrow north of the metro station. And so accommodating those users that might not be as comfortable riding on the street would kind of be served by that 10-foot shared use path.
I mean, I'm familiar with, in the city of Falls Church, the WNOD trail has been redone. Separate lanes for cyclists. Although I think that's larger than 10 feet wide. I think it's might be around 12 feet wide. But I would be concerned that pedestrian use could be deterred by fear of speeding cyclists. And it seems to me it might be better to widen Haycock Road and accommodate the cyclist on Haycock Road in order to have a pedestrian walkway which will be safe for pedestrians.
Sure. So I understand the thought behind that. The reason we would not want to do that is due to Haycock Road, Shreve Road, Route 7, any of these roads, Great Falls, they do have higher traffic numbers, and the average user, so even kids, people who are casual bikers, are not going to be comfortable riding on the roads, even if there is a bike lane. And so I think that those people that are you really see out there going fast on bikes are still going to use the roadway. The shared use path is really to accommodate the average user who's looking to have more casual ride on a facility that's separate from traffic. But I do totally understand the concern of kind of intermingling pedestrians and cyclists. I think with the WNOD trail, certainly you have a lot more space to work with. Here, just sort of working with the constraints of the properties fronting Haycock Road, and then of course getting up to the bridge itself. I think working with what we have, I feel like a 10-foot shared use path would be appropriate. Maybe there's a possibility to go wider in some areas, but that would kind of come out of an engineering study as this gets moved forward. But again, I think it's really important to try to accommodate cyclists off street where we can.
And so Tim brings up a good point. So we do sometimes go with the facilities being wider than 10 feet. If there's going to be a little bit more use and we want a little bit more separation potentially between the potential shared users of the facility. So if that's kind of a concern, we can definitely say, minimum like 10 feet, but definitely ideally 12 or something of more appropriate to accommodate the potential users.
Yeah, we have 10 as a minimum, but we can, definitely include that in there to say that 12 feet is preferred.
In terms of the impact on property owners, I think going wider than 10 feet could result in opposition because some of the front yards there are not very large.
Sure.
Like everything, context sensitive for the solutions.
Yep. Okay, so it seems like we're good with this one. We're going to take out Mount Daniel Drive, so that might have been an error on my part, including that one in there. But we can take that one out, and I think we can clarify the recommendation for Haycock Road as well. So going to the next slide, and then we're almost out of time here. We're looking at the bike map, and again, the recommendations from the advisory group align pretty much perfectly with what the community survey said. The top three, as expected, Haycock Road, Leesburg Pike, Shreve Road. These improvements would naturally be tied into the ones that we've already talked about for pedestrians. Having shared use paths along Haycock Road, along Leesburg Pike, along Shreve Road. So these to me make sense. There was also one to include an enhanced crossing at the WNOD Trail intersection with Virginia Lane. That's really the only project on this 2-mile wide map that is focused on a specific intersection, and therefore the cost would be lower on that. So I think it makes sense to include that one as well. Jeremy, I know you had asked to include that within the AG's priorities. So cost-wise, relatively, you're looking at the $4 signs, $5 million up for the top three, and then maybe 1 or 2 for the fourth ranked project. So any feedback on the selections made here for the bike map? Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, Tim, on the first ranked one, Haycock from Westmoreland to the county boundary line, the location of the yellow 2, is that correctly stated? Are we talking about Haycock from Great Falls to, it's not in the right spot.
It's Haycock from actually Westmoreland to the Fairfax County boundary line with the city of Falls Church.
Where you've got
So
it,
kind of
Haycock looks like from Great Falls to somewhere, and because Westmoreland is further east on the map. See where the 7 is?
He's got the numbers backwards, Tim.
What's that?
Ranking, the second ranked priority is number 3 here. Is that what we're talking about, or do we?
No, we're talking. This is maybe a typo on the map or on the list.
Okay.
The first ranked project description talks about along Westmoreland from Haycock to the county line with.
It's Haycock. It's not along Westmoreland. It's along Haycock. So you see the yellow number 2 there.
It's
kind of
to what?
It's hard to tell from the map just because all the lines are red. The red lines are meant to indicate where the pedestrian or the bicycle facility would go. But I put that yellow 2 there because that's sort of in the middle of Haycock Road, the extent that we're looking at, the segment that we're looking at. So again, we're looking from Westmoreland, which is again kind of towards the edge of that 1-mile circle, all the way down to the county boundary line. And so that number 2 is meant to indicate that stretch.
I get it.
I mean it's hard to see on this map a little bit, but
it's this stretch right here. I'm trying to highlight it for you all. It's an entire stretch.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It was me
what I can do is just highlight those lines a different color so they stand out, since we have 3 segments here. So
yeah, I think the thing that threw me, it might just be my small brain, is the boundary line I was thinking of with Arlington County.
Oh, gotcha.
Oh,
so it's the boundary line with Falls Church City.
The city. Yep.
Yep. That's just a clarification, but it might just be me not thinking.
Maybe we go to the city boundary, Tim.
Yeah.
Maybe make that one edit.
Sure. Yeah, I can do that.
Okay.
And Bruce, you're up next.
Yeah, I agree with that comment about the boundary line. It took me a minute to figure that out. I think having the city boundary would help. Just one comment. I know that you've coordinated with the city. I wonder if it wouldn't be too much trouble to show the plans for bike facilities from the city, just to give that context as to whether these connect or not.
Yes, and we do actually have that in the draft report that I'm working on now. So we have pretty much a whole section dedicated to the coordination we've done with the city. It's not going to be in this one, but in the greater report. So we have their bicycle master plan and some of the projects that they're working on that will kind of feed into the projects we're talking about here.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay. I think that's it for the maps.
I have
Um,
it's Jeremy. I had a
Oh, sorry.
question on,
Go ahead.
yeah, just a quick question. So the one that stuck out to me was the Shreve Road project, since that's, I think, the only priority in all of these that's already funded. And so I guess the question whether in the report that's something that we would want to include, or whether that you, since there's still some decisions to be made about what that looks like, whether that's helpful to the county to show that it's a priority.
Sure, and it's kind of going along the lines of what Jane was saying earlier. I mean, in my mind, I think it's still good to show that it's a priority. First of all, you never know what could happen in the future, but it shows this is really an area that the advisory group thinks is an area to focus on. And we have 4 recommendations here. The top 3 are going to be costly, so I think including that on there is still a good idea. And it's not only enhancing the connectivity on the south side of Shreve Road, so that's funded, that's going ahead. But we've talked about looking at the north side of Shreve Road and maybe enhancing connectivity there. I don't know that whether that's feasible or not, given the space on Shreve Road. But anyways, long story short, I think it's good to sort of indicate that's where the advisory group is focused on. But obviously, other thoughts
Yeah,
are welcome on that.
I guess the only concern is that if folks don't know that there's already projects planned for that section, it seems to suggest that there's nothing that's happening in there when there's, I think the grant is for a 10-foot wide
Right. That's a good
sidewalk.
point.
And so maybe there's just a reference back to the funding that exists.
What's that a
part of
note
the
to it?
report.
I think I
Right,
had a
that's
note like
a
we were
good
gonna
point.
do, so.
Okay. No, good point. Jane, you had.
No, you're muted, Jane.
I thought we decided we would leave the projects that have funding or potential funding, but put a footnote in the report indicating that we anticipate funding or it has been funded.
Yeah, that's what we can do, definitely. A good call. Okay. So last slide here, then we can go on to public comments. So path forward, a lot of, Cheryl, before I go on, go ahead.
No, you can finish. I just have a couple of questions for Jane when you're done.
Okay, sure. So again, today was really meant to finalize the advisory group rankings, which we did. So that's great. Thank you all for your feedback today on that. Next step, we're going to have a 3rd and final round of public meetings. So we're getting a postcard together for that now. One is going to be virtual on October 3rd. So that'll be over Teams from 7:30 to 9. And then the second session will be on the 4th, the following day on a Tuesday. And that'll be in person from 7:30 to 9. So the location is still TBD on that, but we'll send you that information once we have it. And again, we'll be sending a postcard out as well to everybody within the 1 mile radius to let them know that these community meetings are coming up. After that, we're gonna hopefully some of you can attend that meeting, but if not, I'll definitely brief you on how that went, how those sessions went at the 7th and final advisory group meeting. We'll have at sometime at the end of October to sort of wrap up the project and the study and see if there's anything given the feedback we get from the community during those 2 sessions we want to add to the report or edit accordingly. So that's really the goal of our last meeting in October, is to see if there's anything we want to do, given some additional feedback from the community and kind of wrap things up from there. And so with that, again, I'll be updating you all shortly on the next steps and the details of that meeting. But now we'll open up to questions, and Cheryl, you can go first, and then we'll open up to members of the public as well.
Yeah, thank you. My first question isn't really for James, it's just more of an observation. I saw in Tyson's reporter Fairfax Now that there's also a Huntington active transportation study currently underway. And I haven't looked at any of the documents associated with that Huntington Metro study, but one of the reasons why I think data is really important to include in our study and potential data and the figures is that if we're competing for money and priorities with other metro station areas, we need to put the best case forward, and that includes data. That's just a general observation. For anybody, how much did that Longfellow crosswalk cost? And is it finished, or is it going to have some of the flashing beacons associated with it? I was up there earlier today. And finally, last week, Jane, I sent you and a couple of other folks some real deep concerns that a number of us in the neighborhood have about these gigantic trucks, some marked with oversized loads that are now plying up and down Haycock. We're assuming they're coming from the Falls Church City project, but they could be coming from somewhere else. But these are the types of huge vehicles that don't belong on Haycock or Westmoreland. So I was wondering if anybody followed up on that. And I actually have sent a email to VDOT today, but it's really alarming and concerning. So Huntington study, Longfellow crosswalk, and the proliferation of gigantic trucks on Haycock Road.
So Jane, I can address the Huntington study. I'm actually the project manager on that one. That one actually wrapped up. So that study is completed. That was part of a small grant that we had applied to. Fair and Peers conducted a study of the Huntington TSA, and they actually used similar metrics that we used in our study. So they looked at pedestrian comfort by school level of traffic stress. So actually more limited in scope than what we did here, but sort of a similar metrics. So certainly if you all are interested in learning more about that, there's a meeting tomorrow night if you'd like to attend.
I'll also point out that Huntington is not competing with West Falls Church for funding and projects. There are different pots. We go to each supervisor and make sure that we get the appropriate money, the appropriate project identified, and then the money is kind of spread out among the supervisors that way. So we don't ever have areas compete against each other.
And Cheryl, I assume your comment on Longfellow, you're asking about the Westmoreland Hopewood project?
Absolutely, correct.
Yeah. It was about 170,000. That included everything. And Ben said he can take the truck issue.
Yeah, all I have to really add is that we're looking into that now. And so we'll get back to you as soon as we have some more information.
Okay, thanks. And if I hear from VDOT, I'll let you know.
Okay. Any other comments from the AG before we move on to members of the public? Okay, seeing and hearing none.
All right, we have Paul raised his hand first. So Paul, your microphone is enabled. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Can you, I looked at your assertions of what the costs were. Can you explain to me or explain to us how Great Falls and Haycock Road is going to cost over $5 million? You had four dollar signs there.
Mm-hmm. Right. So that's combining a number of projects. So not only is that the intersection improvements, that's also widening that whole stretch of the trail on the north side of Haycock Road from Great Falls Street to the Metro Access Road. And so that accounts for, not only kind of installing the shared use path, but the impacts to property, the stormwater management issues that would likely arise, and we'd have to deal with, the crossing at Turner, of course. So all that was sort of included in the estimate of that cost, as well as, construction costs are increasing. And so looking at this and actually getting it funded and getting it completed, over the next several years, that cost is going to go up. So we included, kind of a percentage for the escalation of that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. And Adrian White, your microphone is now enabled. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you. I have a couple of comments based on notes I've taken throughout this entire meeting. I'm sorry that I am the only person on this call from Ellison Heights, Mount Daniel. I don't know where Bob is. But on Cheryl's first comment that we should be prioritizing projects across, quadrants, I have to agree totally, because we feel that projects very close to the 3 development parcels are much more important than projects that might be undertaken, for example, by the school board to make a hillside between Pimmit Hills and Lemon Road School ADA accessible. To me, they're apples and oranges, and I think Bob would have told you that as well. I'm glad that you took off the sidewalk on Mount Daniel. We didn't suggest it. We have no idea where it came from. We don't think it's needed given the huge width of Mount Daniel Drive, and I'm glad you decided to take it off. Additionally, the AG did not ever select the crossing for the Pimmit Park across Great Falls Street. If that came from the Park Authority, that should be noted. Maybe they should explore it. It's really far from the developments that are proposed or approved, and I don't believe that it compares in priority to some of the closer projects that are that were brought up by the AG and prioritized. I agree with Michael on the road diet on one side of the bridge over I-66. There are things that can be done without putting up Jersey barriers, although I like that idea. But bollards and such to hopefully separate pedestrian and bicyclists from the traffic is a good idea, and it's important. It's way more important than improving ADA accessibility to a school that's pretty far from these developments that are proposed. And just a comment, I was given feedback by folks who live on in the development that would like to see the crossing at Hutchinson, and the idea of a path through Haycock Longfellow Park, which I thought was a great idea. The feedback I got from those neighborhoods is, and I can't verify this, I have no way of verifying it, that they believe that any pathway through Haycock Longfellow Park is unsafe for children. And I have heard stories from former teachers at Haycock and Longfellow about perverts in the park. It's hearsay, but I think you need to look carefully at that if it becomes a serious option, and get feedback from the folks who believe that that's unsafe for children. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Okay. Any other last thoughts, comments, or questions? If not, again, really appreciate everybody's time tonight. So we've made good progress on this, and I'll update you all with the community meeting schedule and the location of that, and hopefully see a lot of you there, and look forward to the next AG meeting with you all. So thank you and have a good night.
Night. Thanks, Tim. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye.
Good night.